So for this week in CyberSchool, we're going to be going over Informacast. In the past couple sessions, we've been going over multicast and some speakers that we have that work primarily with multicast, but we've also got that same line of speakers that works for Informacast. And it just kind of makes sense that we cover both main ways or main avenues to do advanced notification and paging. The two of which that are mainly used in the telecom industry are, of course, multicast that we did in last week's session, which is kind of a general purpose, free, open source way to get paging and notification out, where Informacast is proprietary. It's a little bit more of a special way to do it. It was specifically developed by the company Singlewire, and it's a little bit, frankly, maybe a little bit better at doing emergency notification as compared to multicast, just because it was designed from the ground up with emergency notification in mind, whereas multicast was kind of adapted to emergency notification. So there's some special things with Informacast that just make it a little bit better. And of course, you know, with our huge line of CyberData products, we've got a lot of products that play with and work in the Informacast environment. We've also won some awards from Singlewire for our products in the Informacast environment. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So Informacast is, of course, a notification software suite that was developed by Singlewire. It's kind of like the Microsoft and Windows type of deal, where everybody just refers to it as Informacast, but it's actually created by Singlewire. Just like Windows is, you know, the most common program that everybody knows from Microsoft. And it was originally developed in the early 2000s. It was actually initially developed for a federal agency after the attacks that we had here in the States after 9/11. So it was originally kind of designed from the ground up with emergency notification in mind for all types of different purposes. Again, it was originally designed for a federal agency, but then they expanded it out for use in the public sector. Historically, it's always been packaged with Cisco Unified Call Manager or Cisco Call Manager. They kind of go by two different names. Or you'll also see the abbreviation CUCM, but that's always Cisco Call Manager. And Informacast was just kind of always packaged with it, where when you got a new deployment of Cisco Call Manager, it actually came with, depending on the level of Cisco Call Manager that you got, it would come with either a 6 months or a year of Informacast service free, and then if you liked the service, you could opt into it and continue it. There is kind of a free version that you got with it where you could work with, I think, up to 10 speakers without actually paying for it, but honestly, if you like the service, it's a really, really powerful service, and it's well worth the money. It's not particularly cheap, but it's really worth it for what it's capable of doing. So it can send either mainly audio or text-based notification, and you can kind of combine them together depending on what the endpoints that actually can receive the notifications from Informacast are capable of. And even the newer versions released in version 12.0.1 actually supports SIP. And that's a really cool functionality where typically Informacast was just kind of a standalone way to get emergency notification out. But in very, very recent updates, I think it's been in the last 2 years or so, just edging over 2 years, where they've integrated the SIP capability from it. So products can actually just work directly with Informacast and actually make calls to either other devices or Informacast or call out to your standard phone system. It's a really, really powerful feature of Informacast, and it's supported on a pretty large variety of CyberData products. And one thing that's really cool with it is you can just kind of check a box when you're setting up a product on Informacast to opt into the SIP via Informacast feature. It provides a lot of flexibility, and well, underneath the hood, it looks like they're kind of running like an asterisk-based system, just based on the different headers and stuff that you'll see with the message. And there's probably a couple different reasons that they integrated a service like this. It might have been maybe to potentially get away from Cisco, just because Cisco Call Manager is just with anything that's Cisco branded. If you've ever bought, say, any Cisco equipment, whether it's a network switch or a router, they're frankly pretty pricey. It's not particularly cheap. You're getting, a Cadillac or, your Rolls Royce of, your network hardware. You're getting, what you're paying for, but it's not cheap. And with being bundled with Cisco Call Manager, it just kind of had this idea that, of course, since they're bundled together, Informacast is going to be really pricey. So there's kind of the idea that maybe they started to support SIP to get away from being kind of just so concentric with Cisco Call Manager. But now with the new version of Informacast that they have, Informacast Fusion, that's actually cloud hosted, it can actually go and work directly with other phone systems. So with both the SIP via Informacast capability as well as the capability that comes with Informacast Fusion, they're not as tied to Cisco Call Manager anymore. However, in our case, and in the cases of talking with different customers, probably about 80% of the customers that I speak with and deal with on a daily basis that are using Informacast are typically still using Cisco Call Manager. It is changing in the industry, but it's still pretty typical. If somebody's going to be using Informacast, they're going to be using Cisco Call Manager. So let's talk a little bit more about the specifics. Of course, Informacast is absolutely the most advanced emergency notification software suite out there in the business, just from their capability of how it's actually managed and how it works. It uses a proprietary version of multicast, which is actually really trick, the way that they have it implemented, how different devices talk to each other, and that capability actually kind of gives it a step above regular multicast, where it can actually transmit across a WAN or a wide area network, so that way it can go to different remote locations, or even to different to cell phones with the use of SMS text messaging. So it's a really, really powerful product for emergency notification, and it doesn't really limit it to a particular site or a particular network segment like you'd be limited with multicast. So with Informacast, you're getting a lot more capabilities out of it, and with all that extra capability, you're going to be paying a little bit more, frankly, more than free that you would get with multicast. So why would you want to use something like Informacast? Well, Informacast is really widely supported by the accessory telecom equipment industry. So, and that really kind of comes down to, really you can kind of think of CyberData as accessory telecom equipment, where it's still going to be standard telecom equipment. Say your door phone, your intercoms. It's essentially a phone. It's basically a standard VoIP device, but it's kind of an accessory telecom equipment. Some kind of an accessory device where you wouldn't necessarily think, okay, I need to change over to my phone system. Oh, I need intercoms, I need, IP speakers, all that kind of stuff. We're kind of accessories where when somebody's going to be getting a new phone system, they get the phone system and phones, and then they kind of accessorize later down the road for different peripherals that they want for notification and ease and call control. And that's kind of where CyberData comes in, as well as many other manufacturers. So there's a lot of manufacturers that make stuff for the Informacast environment, but of course today we're just going to be talking about CyberData equipment. One of the really cool things that also comes with Informacast is it's really expandable with both their pricing plan and then the actual capability of the servers themselves. It's really easy to add in redundant servers, and then with the hybrid version that they have with Informacast Fusion, it makes it extremely reliable with the redundancy that's built in with multiple different on-premise servers as well as a cloud-based server. So that way you've got all of the backup, even if everything goes down at your site, you've got some terrible catastrophe that happens in your network closet and you lose all your servers. Well, if you had the hybrid version with both the on-premise and the Fusion hosted option, you've got a completely reliable emergency notification system. But if your entire network closet goes down, probably all your PoE network devices, all those fancy IP speakers you got probably aren't working, but hey, you'll probably get text messages from it. And one of the other nice benefits that you get with Informacast is it also has a pretty low latency on your network. Since it uses a proprietary version of multicast, it has that same kind of deal with multicast, where it sends out a single stream and then the switches transmit the stream to all the different endpoints. So it makes it really, really reliable and a pretty low impact on your network. So really, really cool, powerful product, and I think it's really good to use here. Getting a comment here. We'll pause and wait. So to move on a little bit, we'll talk a little bit more about the rules of Informacast. So since it does use a type of multicast and it's kind of a special version, kind of akin to, and just kind of the idea of how like Polycom multicast is a little bit different than standard multicast. To be able to receive these broadcasts or messages, and broadcasts, of course, for lack of a better term, the devices actually have to register with Informacast, where Informacast has to know that the devices are online and ready and able to receive the different messages. So that's one of the kind of first rules of Informacast, first and foremost. They have to be added to the system to be able to receive these different messages. Then, of course, after they're just, in the system, it's not just as simple as having everything in the system. You have to put them into different message recipient groups. And these message recipient groups are very akin to just kind of your standard paging groups, essentially. They're basically, say, your first floor, second floor, your factory floor, your office floor, west wing of the school, east wing of the school, so on and so forth. Your message groups are essentially your IP paging groups. And once you get the devices that are registered and then in those message groups, they're ready to receive a message. But then the kind of important rule that, it's fairly obvious, but it's always something important to discuss when you're talking about the different types of messages that Informacast can send, either text, audio, or text and audio. The device that's receiving and playing that message needs to be capable of playing that type of message. So of course, if you've just got, say, a simple speaker, say like one of our wall mount Informacast speakers, or even our full-fledged SIP enabled Informacast enabled speaker, it can't actually show text. So if you send a purely text-based message to one of our devices, it can't play that. And then in the inverse, if you've got a dot matrix display that can only display text, you can't send an audio message to that and expect it to play, because it doesn't have a way to actually transmit or play that particular message. So you have to think of the capabilities of the endpoints that are going to be playing or displaying that message, and then create the messages accordingly. And with Informacast, and just kind of like multicast and other emergency notification protocols, you can have the messages actually played through your SIP phones. However, since Informacast has been so ingrained with Cisco, currently the support for these messages are only limited to Cisco phones for the time being. They may change in the future, but it's currently only limited to Informacast. Go ahead and close this pop-up here. So now, how do you use Informacast? Informacast is, there's really kind of three different ways to use Informacast. You can, of course, trigger messages through the web interface of Informacast, but that can be a little bit cumbersome, where you have to pick a particular message and then pick a group to play it to and then hit play. So at least that's 3 steps there. And in an emergency event, you've got a tornado coming, there's an earthquake, a fire, God forbid, a shooter on campus. You want as little steps as possible when you're going to try to trigger a message. So it's the most normal way to trigger messages through Informacast are going to be through what they call dialcast, which is the way that you actually go and dial into Informacast, of course, using whichever platform you prefer, by dialing a trunk with a prefix and then a dialcast number to actually trigger that particular message that's associated with a message group. So we've talked about this in past CyberSchools, but essentially think of dialing 9123. 9 would be the number to dial the trunk to reach out to Informacast, and then 123 would correspond to a particular message that would be played on Informacast using the dialcast feature. So by dialing 9123, you would dial the trunk and then pick a particular message that would play to a particular message group. And that easy capability that you can either just pick up a phone, dial 9123, leave the phone off hook, or depending on the settings, hang it back, and run out of the building if the building's on fire, or just leave it off hook. It gives you a lot of capability to go and quickly send that a message. And since it's just a standard number to dial, you can set that up as a soft key or kind of a quick option, say on your phone, so that way if there's emergency, you just press that soft key and get the heck out of Dodge. You get out of that building if that building's on fire, or if there's an earthquake, you go to an earthquake shelter area. So it creates a really, really easy way to kind of streamline those particular messages. The other main way to use Informacast is to use scheduled events. So Informacast has a really robust scheduling capability that's built into it. Definitely probably one of the most advanced options out there for doing scheduled events, which could either be bells for a school or a college, or even, break bells or notifications for a large enterprise facility. If you're dealing with, a really large construction area or factory that's, running 24/7, you're going to need those different types of events and different bells and notifications for all of the employees that are working, so that way they can go throughout their day. And Informacast brings all those kind of scheduled events and that capability to the forefront. And they've really spent a lot of time in development and coming up with these three main ways to kind of interface and use Informacast. So what kind of products does CyberData actually use, and what kind of stuff do we actually recommend to use in the Informacast environment? So like I mentioned at the beginning of CyberSchool this week, we've actually won a couple different awards from Singlewire, who hosts a big kind of event every year for different manufacturers to enter in different products into different categories, and why we think that they're the best options out there for a particular form or a particular issue at hand. So we've won awards throughout the years. I always like to highlight our IP66 horn. Anybody that's been watching CyberSchool for quite a while knows that this is one of my favorite products, if not my favorite product from CyberData, just because of its paging and price ratio, where it's got, of course, the most coverage for the best price out of all of our products. And with that, it's actually won twice from Singlewire. We've won both 2019 and 2020. So it's a really, really capable and cool product out there. We've also won for our outdoor strobe as well. I don't have that image here. I didn't want to just kind of plaster our awards all over this page. We're not trying to gloat too much, but we do win some awards from Singlewire. So we've got pretty much products in all of our different standard SIP categories. We've got our standard IP speakers, like you would expect, of course, our IP66 horn, and then our standard ceiling mount speakers that everybody knows and loves, as well as our intercoms, anywhere from, say, the emergency intercom that we have pictured here, to our standard outdoor intercoms with and without a keypad, just about all the different flavors of our intercoms. As well as our IP to analog section, we've really only got the Informacast-enabled paging adapter in that realm, because that one's the one that we find most customers end up using and end up needing. And with that unit, it's just got so many versatile connections with the tip and ring 600 ohm balanced connection, as well as the RCA 10,000 ohm unbalanced connection. And with those two connections, you can connect to just about any amplifier out there. So with that one product, that kind of all encompasses the IP to analog realm. And then, of course, finally, we've got our IP notification endpoints. So our indoor and outdoor strobes really are just great options to add in with Informacast. When I first started with the company, I didn't really understand how a strobe could be super useful in different call groups or ring groups. But when I moved over to support, just having that extra blinking light that just kind of coincides with that ring group going on, I found it to be extremely helpful just in my own practice. Just helping out at the company, if I'm out talking to another one of our employees discussing a case, or downstairs talking to our RMA manager about a particular case, just having not only that auditory ringing noise, but a nice little blinking light on the wall is just really nice for that notification. And of course, strobes are great for louder environments or places where people might not be able to hear things. We've had a whole bunch of schools use our strobes indoors for classrooms for deaf children, just so that way they know that there's an announcement going on and they can look up and look for sign language to actually get the particular message that's going on. So strobes are really, really versatile. And with our four main product categories, we've pretty much got we can fill just about any need in the Informacast environment. With all our different offerings, from strobes to intercoms to speakers and analog interfaces. So we've really got a well-rounded option to pretty much work in any type of Informacast environment. So now that we've kind of covered, what Informacast is, how you set it up, how you use it, what we offer, how do you actually go and set one of these things up? Like, let's talk specifics. So when you set up stuff for Informacast, you're typically using SLP, which means Service Location Protocol. And that's essentially plug and play, where if you've got SLP properly set up and all of your switches are configured appropriately, When you go and plug in the device, it'll send out a broadcast alert and find the Informicast server, and the Informicast server will actually tell it, okay, I'm at this IP address. This is the string where your configuration file is, and the speaker, the horn, the intercom will download that file, and then when you log into the web interface of the Informicast system, you'll see that, oh, I've got new devices detected, and it'll be all of those different devices that you just plugged in. And it makes it a really, really easy way to set up and manage the devices through Informicast. As close as plug and play as you can get. You know, you still have to go and add them into the Informicast system by giving them a name and then putting them into different message groups. But if that's all you got to do, that's really not too much work. Now, unfortunately, SLP isn't really an option in every single network. Ideally, you should have SLP enabled just because it makes it plug and play, you know, as close as a toaster as you can get. But sometimes that's just not really an option. You know, sometimes you've got a hosted option, or you've got an off-site Informicast server, and you need to directly point the speakers or the devices to the Informicast server. So we've got an option to do that. On our device tab, there's a way that you can actually put in that full string that would be provided by the Informicast server to the device if they were using SLP, and the speaker can just reach out to that particular address and request the file. So even if you don't have SLP and you're not capable of setting it up on your network, you've got, you know, other reasons why you can't either use the multicast transport in between your switches to pass that through, or you've got an offsite server, you can go and actually get our devices to connect to the Informicast server with relative ease. It's, of course, a little bit more work than SLP, but at the end of the day, it's not too bad because every single device is going to be using the same exact string. So you can pretty much just set the one string and then just copy and paste it into all of your different devices as you're setting them up, or have a DHCP rule that would point to a TFTP server or some other kind of local server that would just have the device grab that on boot, and just through the configuration file, I'll automatically go out to that server. So there's a couple of different ways that you can set up pointing the devices to Informicast. But once you get over that hurdle of getting the device to talk to Informicast, which is arguably the hardest part, all you have to do is set up the devices in Informicast, of course, by setting a name, setting a volume that they're going to use, and then putting them in message groups. And then once you go through that whole process, you're pretty much ready to go. I always recommend running the test feature just to make sure that, you know, you've got an appropriate volume level for one of your speakers, and just to make sure that the audio is actually playing. You know, you definitely want to test all your speakers, especially in an emergency notification system, to make sure that they work before you get an emergency. I wouldn't want some kind of an emergency to be your dry run to check and see if that whole paging system that you spent $20,000 on, or, you know, what have you. I wouldn't want to wait until you actually need it to test to make sure it works. You want to make sure that that thing's going to work right from the get-go. So, is Informicast really the best way to page overall? It's widely supported across the majority of VoIP accessory equipment. So, you know, not just, you know, CyberData products. Of course, that's really all we're going to mention here today, but there's a lot of different manufacturers that make stuff for the Informicast environment. So depending on, you know, whichever company you go to, hopefully CyberData if you're watching one of our tutorials here, but there's a lot of different products that you can get and use in the Informicast environment. If you go through the process to actually set up Informicast on your own, if you're setting it up actually on-premise and not just doing a hybrid or a hosted option only, Informicast is actually really easy to set up. I've done it, you know, a couple times for our test servers that we have at CyberData, and it's a really, really easy process as compared to setting up some other platforms, asterisks. That one's kind of a pain to set up, but really Informicast is super duper easy to set up, and it's really easy to work with. After you go through the setup of actually setting up the server, it's really, really easy to go and add different devices into your Informicast realm and just have them actually play different messages. It's really, really easy to do. And one nice thing with it, one really good reason to use Informicast is it's got redundancy built into it. You know, when you're going and actually setting up the system, it actually asks you if you want to set up multiple different servers. So if you want, say, like in the Cisco environment, a publisher and a subscriber node, or basically just two different servers that work congruently. So that way, if you have one server go down, you've always got a backup, and probably more. Typically, people have, you know, sometimes one or two servers, 3 3 or even more, depending on the size of the enterprise or the school that's going to be using it. So redundancy built in from it with the ground up. And there's a whole bunch of different options to actually implement it. Whether you can do just on-premise, where you're only running your own servers. They've got hosted options if you want to go just hosted and let them deal with it, or you can go for the hybrid option, where you've got both your on-premise and your cloud hosted option. So it provides a lot of capability there. Of course, if you're going to be going for the multiple redundant servers, there's probably some additional pricing in there with it. You might need some different licenses, but I mean, that's kind of part and parcel when you're getting these kind of, really specialized servers or softwares for that kind of capability. Sometimes you have to pay, some special extra licenses in there. But with that, the one kind of downside that, frankly, I kind of struggled to come up with Informicast is that, frankly, it can be a little bit pricey. Mainly just because it was kind of tied in with Cisco Call Manager for so long that it just became kind of a pricey product. Not necessarily that that's a bad thing, but it ends up just being a little bit pricey, just in the actual price to get the servers themselves, to get the software, and then the equipment themselves can also be a little bit pricey. So it's definitely a thing to consider. And with that, with the high price that you get with it, typically, in my case, in my experience, when I've been working with different customers or talking to people at different trade shows, typically Informicast is really only used for your really large enterprise-based customers that would be either multi-states or even multi-international, if they in some cases, or they're going to be big universities or really big schools that might be able to have the budget to afford a Cisco-based system and an Informicast-based system. You'll still see it in K-12 campuses too, especially in your little bit better school districts. But again, it's just kind of pricey, so it does kind of limit it where you'll see it. It's definitely not something that I would recommend for a mom and pop shop. A little auto garage that has a couple employees, a couple horns, a couple phones inside, no remote locations or anything, might not be the best for them. But say a gigantic company like Jiffy Lube, that might not be a bad idea for them. So that way they could send out they could send out notifications across all their different locations, and makes it really, really powerful. So finally, we'll just go over a couple terms as we come to the end of our presentation here. The most important terms that we'll have to go over, of course, today is going to be SIP. SIP is the protocol that's mainly used to make calls from one endpoint to another, and that's really only covered because we've kind of discussed that in some of the ways that our products support that. And then, of course, Informicast, which is an advanced notification server that's sold and distributed by Singlewire.
Thank you for watching this edition of CyberSchool. If you have any questions, please get in contact with our sales department. They are available by email at sales@cyberdata.net or by phone at 831-373-2601 extension 334. Please make sure to like this video and subscribe for more content like this from CyberData.